Welcome back, folks, and welcome to our next session. As you can see, we've reconfigured one or two things here in the studio. It is our panel, and as I say, we've got some new faces with us and some old ones as well, back from earlier sessions. We'll introduce you them properly in a moment or two. But before we do, we have a quick poll question to ask you folks. Here it is. What do you think is going to be the top 2024 data and analytics trend? We've heard already some of the thoughts of our speakers, but what are yours? And there's some options that you can choose from here. Here they are. You've got data ops, generative AI, data observability, federated governance, data contracts, or option number 6 there is other. And if you are inclined to put other, please do tell us what that may well be in the chat section. As I say, Carl, our producer here today, will keep an eye on that for you. We can bring you in as part of this. We'll take a look at the results to the poll very shortly, but let's go ahead and welcome our panelists. Please say hello again to Sendur, to Mike, and to Mark Sear, who's a new face as part of our panel here with us in the room today from Maersk. And perhaps maybe if I start with yourself, Mark, you enjoying the showcase so far?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Good fun. Learning a lot. That's what counts.
Good. That's what hopefully all of our audience can take away from today as well. Maybe just by way of a proper introduction, really. I know we've got your session following this one. So maybe you just want to tell the folks watching along a bit about yourself and your experience, your pedigree in this field.
Well, I typically say my name is Mark and I'm a dataholic. And that's really what I am. Worked in tech for 40 years. Always worked with data. Love data. My hobby is data. Probably not a lot more to say than that. It's just data, AI, machine learning. That's what it's all about.
Live and breathe it, exactly as we were saying earlier on. And hopefully, I'm no doubt that passion will shine through here in this session here today. As we get your thoughts on what are the top predictions for 2024. It's a bit of a broad church, no doubt, but we'll go through it one by one, really. And I think easy questions for me to ask, at least to start with, but perhaps not so easy to answer. But we'll start right at the top, really, and think about the top challenges as we're looking ahead to 2024. Lots of organisations probably already are, but maybe Sendur, if I start with you, that question, in essence, the top challenges, what can you share with our audience?
You know, you've got this compounding growth of data volumes. I suspect Maersk is probably 40, 50% year-over-year data volume growth. And you've got, with that, constant questions being asked of the data. And so you've got this sort of push and pull. I think that's a big challenge for organizations. Constant need to go faster on analytics and insights, but then constant volumes of data growing. And that creates just this massive complexity. So who manages all this complexity? Sometimes central data teams do, and sometimes the actual product owner's data as a product, if you will. You've heard that trend before. And so I think the biggest challenge is really for a lot of our organizations building the right data operating system, not to be too buzzwordy, but frankly creating the right framework for operating with data is going to be so important. And there's solutions like Dremio, of course, that can help with that. But at the end of the day, it has to start with the right mindset and around the whole organization. And a lot of practitioners that I speak with, they sit in, sometimes, unfortunately, they sit in their IT or infrastructure silo. And that it's that partnership with the business that makes all the difference in my mind. And that's the challenge I think they're facing.
And you hear that time and time again, don't you? Especially that divide between IT and the wider business, of course. But Mike, maybe just if I come to you, I think earlier, might have been yourself, we were talking about data complexity as being one of the, I was hearing that in your response there. Do you share that view with Sendur?
Yeah, wholeheartedly. I mean, I think data complexity is a major issue. We've now got, as I said, distributed data estate. People, that makes it harder to find, harder to integrate, harder to manage, harder to govern. And so I think, getting that under control, understanding it, and helping govern that and getting the right tooling on board to be able to do that really matters, because as we see, consistent data, high quality data really matters when it comes to the outputs that we're all trying to produce here. The insights that are coming out of machine learning, that are coming out of BI and whatnot. Well, all of that really matters. I think data complexity can be almost overwhelming at times, and I think that's why I think a rock solid foundation around data governance matters. It's not like super jazzy topic, but it's a really important one.
No. Yeah. He didn't, and one thing I think you implied implicitly in that is the trust piece of it, right? Everyone's jobs are on the line when they're producing these data sets, right? They're doing financial reporting, they're doing critical audit compliance reporting. So trust is only comes when you have that right governance in place. So trust is a big piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe Mark, what about yourself? Your thoughts on what your peers are
much the
saying?
same. I think
Yeah.
probably the single biggest problem is just complexity, but also the speed of change. Freedom of knowledge of what's going on in the data world. There is probably literally not an hour goes by in my day where I don't get pinged by one of our 100,000 users saying, have you seen this tool? Have you thought about using this? Can we use this? We'd like to use this. And that explosion of interest in data is something, and I hate to use the word control, but if you don't get to grips with
Just to harness that.
something my boss has said to us recently is do less next year, not more.
I think though as well, we're at the point now where the complexity of data to some extent is outstripping humans' ability to deal with it all manually. And so therefore we need technology to automate the ability to understand what we have, to automatically classify it and help us be able to identify, how to do this job much more rapidly and get control of it. And I think that's, we're getting AI to be able to assist people to do that these days.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's something both of you have spoken about, generative AI. I mean, it is the top trend, arguably, of this year at least. How do you see data teams adapting to adopt generative AI? Obviously, it's already in play, but what have you seen perhaps work well?
I've seen, so maybe there's sort of flavors of generative AI and sort of it's a broad brush term. I think where I see the biggest value and the most near-term sort of monetizable value, for lack of a better term, is really in this concept of using it as the natural interface for accessing and using data. And so we could talk about all the various large language models out there, but frankly, the ability to just access your data and ask questions of your data very, very quickly and effectively is very important. I mean, Google popularized this with their single search bar to sort of bring the web in. In a lot of ways, it's a good analogy to what organizations are facing, which is large volumes of data growing, complexity. Most folks don't know where to find the data, let alone do they trust the data. So you've got to figure out and use something like generative AI to help make that easier. So I do think it's the new user interface in a lot of ways.
I think as well, though, with generative AI coming from a background where it's trained on massive amounts of public content, I think the ability to be able to make embeddings out of data catalog metadata to help pass over into generative AI, large language models, really is going to make a big difference in helping solve this problem.
Yeah, in fact, we did, within even Dremio, we've added the ability to do text to SQL, so ask a question, converts it to SQL. And that was just step one. I mean, really the next, that we just recently are releasing is now the ability to automatically do labeling and wikis in the system. And we will continue to move forward where we'll be able to then do semantic searching. So instead of knowing, hey, what zip code is this, where is the address, we should be able to figure that detail out without, in the historical world, manually writing these terms and differences, none of that. We sort of de-wrangle, if you will, as much as possible.
And I suppose looping this back to data lakehouse architecture, of course, which we're talking about here today. I mean, is AI going to be the best thing for data lakehouses, in your opinion? I
think it's an element. Like there's no perfect nirvana, sort of use a term in sort of my presentation. But I think it's a tool, and those tools can be leveraged. And if they're leveraged the right way, they can truly advance. And in fact, we've seen advances like, a lot of the Copilot examples are helping a ton in terms of driving productivity. And so someone that you would take 10 hours to do something that you do in an hour and a half or 2 hours. I think it's all about a productivity benefit that comes with generative AI. There's this fear around jobs and so forth. And really, my thinking is, no, actually it means we can do a lot more and be more productive and thus do more higher value things. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I asked you the question, I think, just at the tail end of your session about, as we're seeing sort of the adoption curve, continue and increase, is that leading to a greater appreciation for the value of what data brings to an organization? Are you seeing that in terms of, the AI adoption is really brought that into sharp focus?
I think it's made people think more than it's necessarily made them think about the value of data. But the corollary of it is people are now beginning to think about quality. They're beginning to think about, well, if I just go onto ChatGPT and I ask it a question, can I really trust it? That then makes them think, well, if we've got an internal ChatGPT, I really need to be able to trust it because my customer is going to see it. So I think it's making people appreciate value. And I think for the first time in several generations, people are actually really beginning to believe that data quality is vital. Because in the past, everybody's wanted data quality, but honestly, nobody's really wanted to make the effort to do it.
I also think, though, that data products are helping people think about data more easily. You can think about data. Data is just like some big sea of it, I mean. But data products are really bringing it into business focus. and therefore allow people to zoom in on specific kinds of data and talk about it more. And that really allows this kind of world between business and IT to kind of collapse a little bit and come together, because I think it really makes a difference in terms of talking about data in a business context like that.
Let's pause for just a moment, because we asked our folks watching, of course, what they see as perhaps the sort of top emerging trends. Generative AI was one of the options. We've spent a few minutes just discussing it here. So maybe let's just take a look and see what our audience have put then in relation to this question a few minutes ago. Well, there you go. That pretty much confirms why we're right to be talking about it here as part of this panel. So yeah, 57% there of the audience indicating generative AI. Perhaps no surprises, but then 21% data ops. I think 10% there data observability. But we talked about what we thought we might see in this poll a little bit early on. There's the confirmation. And federated government's in at 9%. So I don't know if there's anything just to extrapolate from the results. What are you seeing there in what our audience have put?
I think there's an awful lot of people, if those numbers hold, that are going to be sued for giving out inaccurate data. Become a lawyer now, because you're not going to have one 57 without the other. Not unless you want to run the risk of hallucinations, which is something we don't want. So.
No, absolutely. And I suppose then my sort of final question on this particular point: what would your single best advice be for organisations that are getting to grips with this, trying to wrap their arms around AI as you say, it's a broad stroke, but what advice would you have for folks here on this journey?
Yeah, I'd love your perspective as well as a day-to-day practitioner, but I would say, too often there's this sort of, people are thinking about a big picture solution. Hey, let me build this massive foundation, and let me do this massive thing of deploying XYZ infrastructure and spending millions of dollars doing so without getting to the value first. And so what I often talk to practitioners about is, can you shift that thinking and take a vertical slice? Essentially to go from foundation all the way up to value to the user and back. And the reason you do that is then you get to deliver to the end user, if you will. That is ultimately the customer at the end of the day in any data conversation. And we want to make sure those folks are getting the value. They trust the data. They see value in it. They're able to drive business insights and decisions. And if you can do that in one sliver, then you can rinse and repeat over time. Because as you add more data sources and more information, the complexity is exponential. And so that allows you to get to value quickly. If you go the other way, which is you start at the foundation and you build everything out at the foundation, that makes it very challenging. And oftentimes we see this with our customers. Those that start with a single use case with Dremio tend to do a lot better, because they say, I'm going to do this use case, I'm going to get to value, I see the value, then I'm going to go expand, et cetera, et cetera. It's the ones that take 2-year projects that make it more challenging, and we tell them, hey, why don't you get to value on this first piece, and then we can do the rest. That's the shift that I think we need to start seeing more.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I mean, I think I think we're obligated to understand what the strategic business objectives are within a business strategy, and then align these projects with that. So you're building out a collection of what data products, what machine learning models, what BI, what AI bots are needed to achieve that business objective. And so you're really focused on value from the get-go, rather than a kind of field of dreams approach, which let's just build all this big data foundation and hope they go use it, which is absolutely not the approach. I mean, I think therefore it's imperative, if you like, on people to understand the business strategy and priorities, and then look to business align. And that's why I think the federated organizational structure is also particularly important, where I talked about a sort of program office that kind of oversees all of these initiatives, and whose job it is to make sure that they're aligned.
Well, speaking of alignment, I'm just going to loop it back to the report, the State of the Data Lakehouse report. You mentioned obviously some of the challenges that organisations will no doubt face in 2024, whether it's the complexity, whether it's quality. How was it reflected in the report, and perhaps what we're hearing from our panelists in the report itself? Yeah,
I think what you already saw in the adoption of lakehouses is part of, I think, this trend towards simplification. And why is that? Well, you saw in sort of the picture there, people are hopping from multiple environments. I want ETL over here, I want to copy and do this over here. I've heard some of my customers say copying data is the devil, is a statement they make. And while that may be an extreme statement, I think it reflects the fact that they're trying to bring some stewardship to the data, because if you don't have the stewardship, you have the hallucinations and everything else. So I do believe the State of the Lakehouse report tells you at least people are moving in that direction, and lakehouses are a good major step in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's let's continue the conversation. And again, folks, if you have any thoughts for our panelists here today, then do share them with us and we can bring you in as part of our conversation. But let's think for a moment about macro trends for folks here, and what maybe comes to mind when you think about some of these, and maybe what should data leaders be aware of as we look ahead to 2024. Sort of get the glass ball out a little bit, but it looks like it's being directed this way. So
there's a comment in the chat. What should data leaders think about? I think they have to think about just the speed of change. What's happening around them. I think agreeing with what these guys have said, the days of 5-year Soviet plans are gone. I think you're very lucky if you've got a 5-month plan right now. So I think they need to focus in on doing fewer things better but faster. Rinse and repeating, to your point. Single use case, get it out there, smash it, get the value, find the next one, learn the lesson, go. Not, let's get together a committee, let's get together a steering group, and all those things that, quite frankly, in my opinion, not an official Maersk opinion, I should say, are just a waste of time. And I think it's going to be very hard for some people to move. And it's why I think you start to see perhaps a generational change happening, that the older, more senior people are actually finding it harder to react to these changes than the younger people who've grown up with data. They've grown up with everything on their phones, etc. They're the people I see pushing, let's get to the next level. I have one guy on my team in particular, he's like 22 years old, he's at university, and he's not even studying computer science. What he knows about large language models and how to leverage them is like gold to my organisation, to my team. So learn that lesson.
And Mike, I'm just curious, is that a trend also, sort of resonate with what Mark's saying there?
I think to some extent, but I also think as well, this whole, I think Sendur talked about it in his presentation, the whole kind of learnings from software development, getting into this whole, continuous integration, continuous delivery approach, so you're getting incrementally roll out continuous progression, to really accelerate things without disrupting what's going on at the moment, and therefore incrementally driving more and more. But also, I think I alluded to the fact that as you build more and more ready-made, then the people who are coming after you are going to find 60, 70, 80% of what they need already made, and therefore they're going to get progressively faster as you incrementally build that up. And so, the whole approach then is far more modular. It's not one big monolithic analytical system I'm trying to build. What I'm actually doing is getting this production line approach going and accelerating the consumption side, so that over time they actually get faster and faster and faster to deliver value, just because more and more of what they need has already been built. And so this whole reusability thing really, really matters.
Well, you mentioned there was a comment in the chat, and there was, and it's actually a question for yourself, at least initially, from one of our audience members, and it's looping back a little bit to we were talking about hallucinations with large language models, and the question here is, how are you thinking about dealing with hallucinations? How are you going to mitigate for those?
I think our initial approach will be to make sure that the quality that goes into the actual foundational data we've got is right. Secondly, we'll obviously be building RAG augmentation, so retrieval augmentation alongside it, to make sure the right corporate rules are applied to that data as it comes out. And then the third thing that we're looking at doing, very potentially at the moment, is building our own small language model or large language model. For example, you can tune a 1 trillion token, 7 billion input model now for about $250,000 in 9 days. And I think that will be a trend that will come, because if you think about the nature of, let's say, ChatGPT, just to chuck one out there, so much of the stuff is in there you don't actually need. It's great to know who the US president was in 1826, but quite frankly, not many people in my organisation are asking that. So I think you'll start to see more people think about building models internally as the thing matures. That will in turn eliminate hallucinations or certainly reduce them. And then I think the whole game changes again around about end of March. Maybe I might go as late as June when AGI is announced, and then all bets are off then. So I think it's going to be one of the most exciting years to be alive ever the next year. I really do.
There you go. That's a soundbite and a half for 2024, isn't it? Do you share that though, in many ways, Sendur, those feelings?
Yeah, I think we're in a bit of a hype cycle, but I also
Yes.
agree that there are some real tangible use cases we've all seen, as Mark is alluding to, and I think you've already got it in production in several situations, I think, and I think he's seen the value. So I do think these new technologies, such as if AGI ultimately matures and gets there next year, which would be very interesting to see, and that is a game changer if that ends up happening. But ultimately, to get all that right, you got to have that curated set of data that's relevant for your domain space, and that will drive even faster accuracy in what you're doing. And so that is going to be a piece of the puzzle. So even if you said tomorrow, I want to drop out new large language models, unless you have a mature data environment like Mark does, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that. So you've got to do both. Now is the time to go make that happen. And I think in doing so, those that are deploying large language models, the tooling is getting more and more mature. Like every month you're getting new tooling, but actually it's also starting to consolidate and making it easier either from the cloud providers or what have you. And so that combination means you don't need to sit there and stitch everything together. You may have a WizKid 22-year-old from Maersk, no poaching, right? It's not okay. But if you don't, you want to still set that foundation of getting their data quality and governance right, and getting basic data-driven analytics happening. Then when you get to generative AI and even potentially AGI, then you get to a place where now you can trust the data, and that is critical, because if you go drop on AGI on top, or even a traditional generative large language models today, and you don't trust the data, it's going to be totally useless.
The rules don't change, right? Garbage in, garbage out was first
Exactly.
quoted in 1947, wasn't it?
I don't know.
So I think it was around about 1947, right? So you go figure. The rules do not change. Nothing is going to magically fix this for you.
Yeah.
So start with that foundation.
No, absolutely. I'm going to pivot ever so slightly to another sort of question here that we have regarding talent and skills. And this is obviously something that I don't think any organisation has been immune to, particularly in recent years. Is there a talent or a skill that you found particularly difficult to attract or indeed retain? So two ways of thinking about that. And again, subsequent, wider questions, how should data leaders sort of adapt to that sort of situation? Maybe if I start with yourself, Mike, with your clients.
Two come to mind. The first one is data engineers, but I think the way, the second one is data modeling, actually. We almost sort of skate over that like it's not important, like it's a dying art almost. But I really think these are two fundamental skills that really, really matter. And I think the way to overcome it, given that there's a just shortage in the market anyway, is what I alluded to, which is this whole idea of a data and analytics academy, and investing in your own employees, upskilling your own employees. I also think taking IT expertise and embedding in those teams around the enterprise, tasks the IT expert with upskilling the people in their team. And so it's almost like that IT switches to be an enabler rather than just an expert that goes off and does everything. And so to me, that's what's really going to fuel this. And some great successes. As you know, I'm chairman of Big Data London, and some great case studies this year at that conference of people implementing data and analytics academies. It really has made a difference to their employee base. And I think as well, you get traction from the employee base because they then feel that their employer is upskilling them and investing in them. And I really think that makes them, more determined to contribute to the overall performance of the organization.
I'm going to open that question up. I mean, if you...
Well, I'm very lucky because I actually look after the AI and machine learning internal. We call it academy. We prefer to call it a learning process. We've put this year over 1,100 people through our 101 course, which is fantastic. Next year, just rolling out this week, actually. Shout out to Ashish. He's just rolling out to another 2,000 people, that same 101 course. They then graduate through 201. 201 split into an A and B, whether you want to be a practitioner or just learn how to recognize use cases. The feedback in general is, this is amazing, the company is letting us do this. And we see it as a team sport, okay? So data is a team sport. It's not something just somebody sits in a corner and does. In terms of the skills, I think this probably sounds a strange thing to say, the most uncommon skill out there is the ability to think. And those are the people you need to take real good care of. People that can think outside the box and people that are not afraid to cannibalize their own products and their own careers in order to move things forward. That don't just want to sit in a corner and say, this is my job and come hell or high water, I'm hanging on to it. Those are the things that I like to encourage in people: freedom of thought, freedom of action.
Yes, yeah. And Sendur, anything just to add really onto what your peers have said here?
I think the piece that I'm going to say data literacy, but ultimately it's similar concepts.
AI literacy,
Yeah, it's very important. Partly because we have this notion of I'm a business user who typically, or in the business unit, who has a better sense of their data than other teams, and so because they have a better sense, getting them to be data literate means that they can then take all that business knowledge, that 90%, 95%, add in that that smidge or that pinch of data literacy, and now they're much more enabled because they're taking full advantage of that 95% versus the opposite, where you're trying to force one team to go learn the whole business to then know which data to pick.
Sure.
We want to make that, and that's all about that self-service piece we talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, got another question here, and it's again one of those that I like to ask, but I'm not really sure if it's as easy to answer. But what is one thing most data leaders aren't thinking about that you think they should be focused on as we look ahead to 2024? I'll give you a moment just to sort of process. But
yeah,
you've got one already. Okay, so Mike's ready.
Yeah.
Let's go to you first.
Well, as I said in my presentation, I think there's an awful lot of assumptions out there at the moment. And the one thing I would say is they should really be focused on making sure that the tools that they're using are integrated and can share metadata, because there's no industry standard out there. And people just kind of assume I can buy tool X, tool Y, and they're just going to stick together like Lego bricks and I can be productive. And then they find that they can't. And they have to do rework or rekeying of stuff into other tools in order to get going. And it frustrates, and therefore they learn after they've bought. And I really think that, that's why I said in one of the trends that I mentioned was companies rationalizing towards a common tech stack to do data and analytics, because they're frustrated because of, they have technology limitations, not because they're necessarily missing tools all the time, but because the tools that they have just don't work together.
Quick off the mark as well. So thank you, Mike, for your thoughts. Same question. I don't know if you managed to.
You go first on me.
You go ahead.
I think they need to think about their people more than anything else. I think products are great. You can buy a product. People will ultimately implement it.
Yeah.
You have to get your people buying into what your vision is for data, and you have to listen to those people, because some of the best ideas come from some of the youngest, newest people. And I think most data leaders need to open their minds to their people and guide their people along the way, because there's an awful lot of people that I meet, they're nervous about AI, they're nervous about what it means. Will you be able to automate every data engineering role within 18 months? Maybe you can, I don't know. But you need to be open and honest with your people, I think, to carry you through this tremendous change that we're going to go through.
And use their ideas. Because a lot of employees are already highlighting mundane tasks that they really don't like doing that could easily be automated through generative AI. Getting your own employees, active in saying, take this off my back and get it automated because I really want to do something more productive, I think is a great way to get them involved.
I would echo maybe one key word that Mike mentioned around rationalization. So simplifying is always an important piece. More tooling, more real estate, if you will, management. No one gets up in the morning and says, I want to have 3 more systems to pull data from, right? No one gets up and does that. I don't think so anyway. People want to simplify.
Yes.
And so I think the more as data owners, data leaders think about, data quality, because I think if you don't have that, nothing else matters, frankly, and you can't trust the data. But once you've established that trust, I think it's about simplifying your infrastructure. And the more complex you make it, frankly, the more things that can fail, the more things you have to manage, the more, frankly, your TCO goes up as well, right? The value is in the insights, not in the data infrastructure. The data infrastructure is critical to enable that value, but you want to simplify that to make your life easier. That's a critical piece of it. So I don't hear enough simplification from data leaders, and I think it's a theme that I'm hopeful they can all take to heart and start to implement.
There we go.
I think one other thing is organizational structure, operating model to do this. We talk about centralized on the one side and then going distributed on the other side. But I kind of think federated is now the in operating model. Where if we are going to have multiple teams around the enterprise, can we have a common program office? Can we have coordination that everybody kind of knows what piece of the puzzle they're building, and how it aligns with business strategy. I think it helps the teams because they can see that they're part of a bigger puzzle. I also think it helps the company because the company can see who's building what, where, and for what business purpose. And I think, this kind of sort of federated operating model is something I think that organizations should think a lot about.
Okay, then, well, conversely, to sort of flip the question on its head, really, we asked you, what most leaders aren't thinking about. Is there something that has been a priority maybe in years previous that actually doesn't need to be thought about as much anymore? Is there a way of approaching that question, if you could distill it into something that you think actually times have changed and we're moving in a slightly different direction? Is there anything that you could share with our audience? I'm going to maybe start with
maybe controversial, but I think the days of dashboarding are dying. The days of, isn't this amazing, here's a pie chart that nobody really understands, but I can slice and dice it in a million ways and send whatever slice I want to somebody. Yeah. I really think those days are dying. It's time to throw out those types of things and start realising that a pie chart is not necessarily insight.
No.
Okay, it's a very big difference between something perceived as insight and true insight. And that's one of the things, I'm not just going to say this just because you're here, but one of the things we like about Dremio is it gets people to the point of insight very, very quickly. We're giving them a cube of data they can just slice and dice, say, there you go, Mr. Businessman, good luck with that, you've got everything. Doesn't answer that question. No. Whereas getting to the nub of letting them do it themselves is really powerful.
We hear that consistent theme across some of the customers. Yeah, that 3 weeks to a day, frankly, and that becomes a big enabler for organizations. The last thing Mark wants is 7 more calls from new users asking for, can you give me this cube or that cube or this cube? You want to make it easier.
I love them though.
Yes.
It's that simplification piece, isn't it? That's what we're sort of coming back to each time. I think that's clear. Mike, any sort of thoughts, or do you want to stew on it? Because I think we have someone who might be willing to come up and ask a quick question before we're at the end of our panel here today. So let's go ahead and welcome an audience member up here on to the big screen, as it were, in the studio. Hello, sir. How are you? Oh, let's just check you're not on mute, because I can definitely see your mouth moving, but I can't hear any audio. So let's just check everything's working your end. There we go. I can hear some audio now. Yes, hello again. Let's try that again. Tell us who you are and maybe your question for our panelists here.
Yes, I have a question for Mark. Mark, I know we spoke at Big Data London and you are amazing in terms of the insights that you shared, but would love to know a little about how are enterprise companies adopting Gen AI and where do you see it going in 2024?
Okay, well, thank you. I'll make sure I Venmo you the money a bit later for saying that. We're adopting it right now. We're taking, I think it's a very positive stance, which, as I said earlier, is to hit 3 or 4 areas very quickly, very hard, and make sure we get value. So we've got co-pilots going, particularly at the moment in sales. So sales co-pilots for our salespeople, obviously, we're going through, for example, Salesforce data, working out what people's mood is, etc., and helping them out on that, number 1. Number 2, if you think about the nature of large-scale logistics, which we do a lot of, 6 million containers a year being moved around. If you think about what that means a lot of paperwork, a lot of contracts, a lot of, how does this work in practice? So what we're looking at is putting vast amounts of documentation, vast amounts of contracts into a highly, highly tuned and accurate database, which on top of which sits a chat GPT or chat interface, so that people can ask questions like, how many contracts have got X, Y in it? What is the get out clause for this contract, et cetera, et cetera. So it's real practical things. But as I said earlier, it's about doing less in 2024 than we've tried to do this year. It's about doing less and getting value out of those projects. So 2023 was really a huge experimentation for us, great fun. We all had an amazing time. 2024, now it's time to put the pedal to the metal, deliver hardcore solutions for the business.
There we go. Love it. Fantastic.
Thank you. Good to see you again, incidentally. I do remember you, actually.
Lovely stuff. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to
you.
Rohit for coming up, and also a lot of love in the chat, I think, for your shirt as well.
There's a story behind it, but I won't say it because it's bizarre.
Absolutely. Well, look, we've got a few minutes left here as part of our panel, so I just want to sort of get some final thoughts really from each of you before we go. I mean, as I said, the premise of this panel was looking forward to 2024. I think you've surmised it in sort of very nicely and succinctly in the fact that it's going to be a year of, I suppose, specifics and really doubling down on all the experimentation, the innovation of 2023, and actually, as you say, really looking at specifics and use cases. Does that align with your thoughts, your vision for Dremio looking ahead to 2024?
For us, we listen. It's always there's a phrase I think you've heard from an old tech movie called a Ready Player One, which is you fight for the user. In a lot of ways, so for us, we fight for that end user, that customer, and how do we make their life as easy as possible? So removing knobs, make it simpler is an important key pillar for us. So we talked a lot about self-service in my presentation, but the self-service piece ties to ease of use, and so both of those things are very important for us. So the more we make it easier for folks to leverage, and it doesn't mean you need 500 sophisticated things. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is to simplify and make it easier for them to get their insights. And if we can do that, I think we'll have a great ability to fight for that user. That's important for us.
Yeah, I love that. And Mike, quick word from you for the sort of final thought looking ahead to next year.
Next year is a very exciting year, but I think the one thing I would just say, it kind of echoes what Mark said a little bit, is, stay focused on value. Don't try and boil the ocean with all of this stuff. There's so much out there. And to echo what Sendur said, take complexity away from users. Don't push it onto them. The more you do that, and then if we can coordinate that and people see progressive movement towards greater and greater value, moving that needle bit by bit, whatever on those outcomes, I think is far more impressive than trying to get a big bang out of this. It's just being systematic and getting into a kind of more, as I was trying to say, more industrialized, well-oiled machine approach to this, rather than trying to have lots of different projects and trying to innovate everywhere. I think it's much better if you pick some of these top priorities and just go after them and progressively make incremental gains.
Yeah. And it's exciting to think where we'll be in 12 months' time as we look back on 2024. Who knows what innovation we'll have uncovered. But thank you very much for joining us here today as part of our panel. It's great to have such thought leaders in one room and a virtual audience watching along. But of course, folks can connect with you in all the usual ways and places. I know, Mark, you're going to stay with us, aren't you? So we can talk about that shortly. But Sendur and Mike, is anywhere we can direct folks to connect with you?
LinkedIn's always the best place, or obviously the Dremio.com website. It's always important.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
and Mike?
likewise, LinkedIn or intelligentbusiness.biz, B-I-Z.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you very much
Thank you.
to our panelists today. That does bring us to a close here in this particular session, but we're not done yet. We've got one more session on the way for you. That's coming up next.